You ever think about the Star Trek transporter as a ship of Theseus problem? I know I have. Anyway, this is the Fractal Design Meshify C. This thing is out today. Yes, at the time that you're watching this video, this was actually just released. This is literally a thing. We got to take an early look at it. The most surprising thing so far, have not unboxed it, is that the box didn't weigh anything. Now with some clever editing and cutting together and things like that, we will go from unboxing to actually putting a system in it to actually commentary on my thoughts about the system and that sort of thing. The box cutter in tonight's performance will be a Xeon CPU with a little bit of poster tack on the back. It's just all in the capacitors. It's like, I heard the screeching through the camera. Sorry for those of you that are a little bit OCD. Well, the tables have turned on Intel. You know, people used to make fun of AMD for being the heat production CPU, and now it's Intel. And so good cooling in your case is even more important than ever. So we shall see how this stacks up. Yep. I don't know if you can see it in the light here. Yes. That's very attractive. And here's our tempered glass side panel. The 4 thumb screws holding it in place, and it's got a nice anti-fingerprint plastic, so you can wait until you actually get a system in there to peel that off, which hopefully we'll remember to do. Some magnetic dust filter on the top here. We've got 2 USB 3.0 ports on the front, microphone, headphone, reset, and a nice square power button. Now the fan does come with 2 120mm fans from Fractal, one in the front, one in the back. You can relocate them, whatever you'd like to do. So the bottom and the front are fully covered in a mesh dust filter. The bottom dust filter, look at that. You've got the entire world at your disposal. Now looking at this gorgeous front, I know what you're thinking. We've got this dust filter removed, this that goes on the bottom. I'll just reach under here and grab and pull, and the front will come off. Well, yes, the front will come off, but there's actually a little lip in there, and you just sort of push up. There you go. And then this comes off without actually having to remove the front. The front panel at the top here is attached to this plastic bezel. This will come off if you pull on it, but if you just want to change the dust filter, all you have to do is push up on this little lever with your hand in the front. It's kind of hard to do from like behind the case, but this, the front of this is lovely. I mean, look at this. So far, aesthetically, Fractal still got it. All right, now that's popped back in place. And that actually was like, okay, so what I just did one-handed backwards was slide the dust filter back on without having to fight the case. If you've ever dealt with, you know, some cases, the dust filter on the bottom can be challenging to get back on unless you line it up exactly right with the little tray that it slides into. That, didn't even think about it. So that's already pretty impressive. Let's take the side off and see what we got under the hood. Our thumb screws for the tempered glass have a little bit of rubber and knurled handles, and the surface finish is completely, you know, there's no Phillips bit or anything like that. So definitely designed to be removed with your fingers. There's some anti-vibration pads on the side and this sort of nice blackout, you know, finish on the inside. But otherwise, it's a nice piece of tinted glass. And there's our inside. Now, one thing that I'm noticing looking at this is that there's probably not enough room to put in a 240mm radiator in the top of the case with an x299 motherboard, because their VRM heatsinks are kind of large. And even if we could, the radiator and fans would probably come down so far that it really wouldn't provide a lot of airflow around the VRM. Probably our only option is going to be to mount the radiator in the front of the case. I've got a Celsius S24. We're going to give it a shot and see what we can do. We've got 2 3.5-inch bays in the bottom there, and there are 3 2.5-inch bays behind the motherboard tray. You can kind of see it in the cutout for the motherboard. So there's a nice large hole cut out here for getting it behind the CPU to install a CPU cooling water plate or whatever. And then there's a metal bar that will hold 3 2.5-inch drives that mounts right behind there. So you've got quite a bit of space for cable management on the inside. Now, this side, the thumb screws are captured so that you will never lose the thumb screws on the side. That's nice, that's an added bonus, good job. Now, even though it does come with 6 zip ties in the box, it also includes 3 Velcro straps in the cable channel here. This is also raised and offset, so you will not be modding this case to support eATX or anything like that, because the motherboard tray is 2 levels, and there are cable cutouts at the transition from the upper level to the lower level. So there's a lot of cable management room at the higher level here on this side toward the front of the case. And there's still a lot of cable management room on this side, and this is the side where your 2.5-inch drives go and that sort of thing. But you've got a ton of cable room here for the motherboard power and anything else that you might want to do. There's also quite a bit of clearance at the top of the case for power cables and fan cables that might come out the top. There's plenty of room for fans. If you're going to run even really big, thick 120, 140 millimeter fans in the top, you totally can do that. A radiator is a little bit suspect, especially with x299, but we're going to put a Gigabyte Gaming 9 in here and see how it goes. The 2 included 120 millimeter fans are 3-pin fans. So you've got one 120 millimeter fan that's pre-installed in the back and one that is pre-installed in the front. We're definitely going to rearrange that, but you know, for this build, it's basically okay. A 3.5-inch drive mounting brackets. Oh, they've switched to, this is nice. This is less metal, less material. Still got the rubber standoffs, but this is much less complex. And you've also got the 2.5-inch mounting screws there. So in the bottom here, you can see our drive cage for our 2 3.5-inch bays is mounted here. Now there are sort of slots cut out here, so you could put other stuff here, you know, water pump, potentially, I'm not sure, you know, whatever else, a fan. But this is removable. If you remove those screws, then this whole thing would come out and open this whole area up, so you'd have a little bit more room. You would definitely have to do that if you were going to install a 360 millimeter radiator in the front, which it does have cutouts for. If you're going to do something elaborate with the front, you will have to remove your 2.5-inch drive bay here with those 4 screws on the bottom. Then this whole thing will come out, but that opens up the front for a 360 millimeter radiator. So if that's what you're into, then you've got enough room to do that. You just need to give up your 2 3.5-inch drive bays, and you'll still have your 3 2.5-inch bays on the inside. Now that we've finished sort of the naked examination of the Meshify C, you know, my initial impressions are it is surprisingly lightweight. I mean, normally fractal cases feel like you could, you know, they're made out of lead. This is astonishingly lightweight. It feels like it's made out of folded steel, but there are no rough edges that I've been able to find. You know, it's riveted together in the corners. The bottom panel, I think, gives the case a lot of strength that it otherwise would not have. But unlike a lot of cases which derive a lot of their strength from the side being tightened down, I don't think that's the case with this. I mean, there are 2 thumb screws that hold the other side in, and it does help the case strength a little bit. But all in all, this has been a pretty solid case in terms of like how it feels. It feels very lightweight, but it doesn't feel cheap, which is surprising, because it's like you pick up the box and it's like, okay, this, you know, what have they done in manufacturing? This still feels like a Fractal case, even though it is kind of lightweight. And the glass side panel is nice, but I'm not really going to know until we get a system in there and take a look at this with a system. So let's put a system in this thing. We put the set in build mode, apparently, and we've got all this wonderful hardware. We've got the Gigabyte Aorus Gaming 9, which is one of my favorite x299 motherboards so far, except for that pesky coil harmonic thing that it has. Other than that, it's an extremely impressive board. It does really, really well. We've also got the Fractal Design Celsius S24. Now, I have not asked the S24 to deal with the level of heat production that we're talking about from x299. Those things are a space heater. I mean, 250 watts. It's, you know, it's 140 TDP, but with the overclocks and stuff, 250 watts, north of 250 watts for those CPUs. Goodness gracious. Can this cooler keep up with it in this build? Don't know. We're gonna put it together. We're gonna find out. And we're gonna use the Gaming 9. We're also gonna use Trident Z, GCL Trident Z, because that's the only quad channel kit that I had available. So yeah, it's good memory though, so it works out really well. It's DDR4 3600. We will be running it at DDR4 3600 in this build. So it should work out. It should work out pretty good. So the main thing that I'm curious about is building in this new Meshify C. It's a pretty, I mean, you know, it's Fractal Design. So Fractal Design, normally they're known for high-end cases. This case is designed not to break the bank, but also be visually appealing. And so it's like, can Fractal balance that without also giving you bloody knuckles when you build a system? It's got a lovely tempered glass side panel. You know, I've got a full review on the motherboard, and I've got a full review on everything else, but it's like, oh, you gotta do a build in it to really, really get to know it. So you begin by installing the motherboard standoffs. Now, I wish that it had come with a knurled motherboard standoff tool, but I get why they did that. And so, you know, you gotta use a Phillips screwdriver to really install those. You can't do it by hand because you need to get the standoffs all the way in there, and they'll be really tight when you do it so that it doesn't back out when you unmount the motherboard. The other thing is mounting the Celsius S24. It's a 240 millimeter closed loop cooler, and it's like, oh, I've got the crazy heat production of x299. Clearly I need a 280 millimeter radiator. No, not necessarily. In testing that we did with the Celsius S24, it held its own. It did really well. Across the board, we could do a 4.7 gigahertz overclock on our 7900X, and we could hit 4.9 gigahertz on 4 cores. Now, the performance with the 7900X doesn't really scale. I don't think I was getting the full performance out of those 4 cores that were running at 4.9. But hey, maybe it's placebo. I don't know. Intel was telling me that, oh yeah, no, those cores are running at 4.9 gigahertz as long as those are the only 4 cores that are active. But for 4.7, we're talking about a Cinebench score of 2,500, which is nuts. It was just shy of 2,500. It was like 2472 or something like that. But goodness gracious, a Cinebench score of 24 something on a 10-core CPU. Yeah, it's definitely running at 4.7 gigahertz. I'm definitely getting the full benefit of that. And yes, it generated quite a bit of heat. The fans ramped up, and it was like a chimney coming out of the top of the machine. So overall, not too bad. Building in this case was pretty easy. I didn't destroy my knuckles. The cable management was pretty solid. I've got room for 3 2.5-inch drives and 2 3.5-inch drives. The cable routing was pretty easy. The power supply was really probably the worst experience. It is a modular power supply that I've chosen to use for this, the Corsair RM850. And I would recommend that if you use a modular power supply, you just go ahead and install all your cables. There's this great shroud that's gonna hide your power supply cables anyway, so there's no reason not to just go ahead and install all your cables. The reason for that is that I needed to add a cable later, and I had to sort of go back and take the power supply out and put it back in, which meant I had to undo all the cable routing ties and things like that. So if you've got a modular power supply, just install all your modular cables, anything that you might conceivably use. Or you can save a few bucks and not get a modular power supply because this case hides everything anyway, so you don't really need it. So let's talk about who this build would be for. It's like, I'm super gamer, whatever. No, just save your money. You need to get probably Z270 if you want the absolute maximum performance in gaming at a cost of good performance in anything else. If you want decent performance across the board without spending a ton of money, probably the Ryzen 5 1600 is going to be a better value because it's a 6-core CPU. It gives you almost as good gaming performance and a lot better performance than everything else. If you're a gamer that's also a programmer, or you're a game developer that's just starting out, again, Ryzen 5, maybe Ryzen 7, much better value. If you are a professional who wants everything to just work, you know, with the Linux testing that we did full Linux testing, we did the full IOMMU group rundown, virtualization testing, that kind of thing. This thing just works. Intel, you know, with their experience in the server space, the Skylake X CPUs and new microarchitecture, I wasn't really sure. Under Linux, it totally just works. But there's always a but, isn't there? So if you're coming from 5960X or like the 6900K, the older 8-core CPUs, there are actually performance regressions for developer type workloads. Now, a lot of those regressions are offset by the extreme clock speed of the 7900X. But if you've overclocked your 5960X or your 6900 and you are an enthusiast developer or somebody who works with software, then you're not going to realize the performance benefits of the 7900X even having 10 cores. You've got 2 more cores. I've got an overclocked 5960X that I use in my main sort of development enthusiast workstation for myself that's, you know, not Xeon based. And the 5960X at 4.2 gigahertz gives this thing a run for its money in developer type workloads. Now there are other workloads where this thing is much faster. I mean, new microarchitecture, new optimizations have been made, blah, blah, blah. But overall, the level 3 cache that is available to an individual core is much smaller on the 7900X. than the 5 or 6,000 series CPU. So if you see a really good deal on a 5960X or a 6900K and you're a developer, and you're not really looking for the absolute maximum end gaming performance or the absolute, or 10 cores for virtualization or whatever, you'd be just as well off to get one of those other used systems and upgrade it and do something interesting with it. I'm sure that Intel doesn't want me to tell you that, but the 7900X is really, especially over prior generations, it's a dubious value if you've already got a 5 or 6,000 series CPU. If you're running something older, or you're coming from an old Sandy Bridge or something like that, and you're looking to get into development and you're looking to get into those kinds of things, it's a solid choice. If you need a lot of PCI Express connectivity, you get 28 lanes with the 8 core and 44 lanes with the 10 core. That is really great for 10 gigabit, a fiber channel if you're gonna do fiber channel stuff. Really high performance, lots of graphics cards. You can do machine learning and gaming and all sorts of fun stuff. You got all kinds of connectivity. In this system, we're running an Intel NVMe, a PCI Express add-in card. Do note that the M.2 slots run through the PCH. So if you're gonna run a lot of M.2 peripherals, you're not gonna really wanna use the M.2 slots on the motherboard. You can use one, and then the other ones, you would use your PCI Express add-in cards. If you're using older M.2 devices that are under a gigabyte per second in performance, well, yeah, you can use the onboard peripherals, it's fine. Just know that the combined PCH bandwidth is only about 4 gigabytes per second. So, you get some, really high-end NVMe like the Samsung Evo that approach that just the one NVMe by themselves these days. So in terms of like a 5-year platform, like a 5960X, those are things you're gonna have to keep in mind. So overall, I was extremely impressed with the performance of the x299 RS Gaming 9. The only real downside of this motherboard is that it does have a little bit of coil whine, a little bit of a harmonic. The harmonic that it produces under heavy load with an overclock, there's some caveats here, is about half as loud as a Founders Edition GTX 1080 under load, and not an overclock. So if you get a Founders Edition GTX 1080, those all pretty much have coil whine. If you have heard that coil whine, this is about half as much. But the Meshify C is so impressively quiet with 520 millimeter fractal fans that you can hear the harmonic just about at arm's length. If you get a little bit farther away, you won't be able to hear the harmonic. If you use it in a different case that's louder and has louder fans, you're not gonna be able to hear the harmonic. I'm told that they're working on a software fix for it, because if you look in the Gigabyte software, there actually is a drop-down menu that lets you change the PWM switching frequency from like 300 kilohertz to like 600 kilohertz. And that does have an effect on the harmonic, but it doesn't eliminate it completely. All in all, this build is a super, super beastly build. If you've got the disposable income and you can just throw money at a problem and you want something that will just work in Linux, x299 with this combination of parts, that's what you get. It is great. If you want to save some money and get 90 to 99% of the performance, you're probably going to be looking elsewhere. Even Intel is competing with Intel, because it's like, I just want the fastest gaming system that I can possibly get. Well, that's going to be Z270. So Intel's competing with Intel there. If you want more middle of the road stuff, the Ryzen 5 1600 at $200 gives you a really good gaming performance and a really good ability to do the type of development that you might be doing as a student or someone who is learning, because you've got 6 cores. If you need more than 6 cores, more virtualization, more bells and whistles, you can also move up to Ryzen 7. So the x299 platform really is ultra high-end, ultra premium, and the value per dollar might not be there, but you get stability and you get performance. So take that for what you will. I had a really great time building in the Meshify C. You should totally consider the Meshify C for your next build, because it is a really nice case to build in. It totally did not demand a blood sacrifice, so that's good, even though it is a really compact full ATX case. The Celsius S24 was also super, super impressive. It's also expandable. It's a closed loop cooler, but you can expand it. I think Jay's 2 Cents did a video on how to take it and expand it to more stuff later if you want to. That's probably a little bit too ambitious for me. I was not expecting a Celsius S24 to keep up with a 7900X from Intel in terms of being able to keep it cool, but it totally did. So Fractal has really done a good job with this cooler. It is really super impressive. I'm hoping that I get to do some more builds in this case. We'll see. Maybe I can do a Threadripper build in this case. I don't know. Maybe we can do some other builds in this case and see how it does for heat dissipation in that respect. If you end up building a system like this, or a system with some of these components, show it off in the forum at Level 1 Techs. I'm Wendell. I'm signing out, and I'll see you there. it.